Step into Mind Matters, where we reveal the high-stakes world of CEOs, from their first-day jitters to game-changing strategies, and equip you with invaluable insights and practical advice essential for your personal growth and leadership journey. And now, Mind Matters.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kendall Racely, your host, and I'm thrilled to have a remarkable guest on my podcast today. Not only does he bring a wealth of knowledge and years of expertise as the CEO of Greenbelt Bank and Trust, but he has a very different story. I would like to welcome Steve Afdahl to the show, please. Thank you for joining us, Steve.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah, Steve, you have a very different experience, and I'm so glad for our listeners to get to be able to hear this. But before I jump in and ask you a bunch of questions, I would like to get a little bio on you so that people can understand your journeys. You started CEO and your background, both personal and professional, Steve.
Okay. I was born and raised in Wisconsin. We moved to Iowa when I was in high school. I went to Iowa State University for 2 years. Then I transferred to the University of Nebraska, where I graduated in 1970. I was immediately drafted into the Army. So I spent a couple years in military service. And when I got out, I went to work for the state of Iowa Economic Development Agency. And for about 5 or 6 years, and in that time, I met a lot of bankers that were involved in economic development activities in their communities.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the line, I was encouraged to get into banking, and I did so. I joined a bank in Boone, Iowa. I was in an officer trainee position for 5 years. After 5 years, this was a big company. We had 36 banks. I was asked to become the CEO of bank in Spencer, Iowa, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. It was during the farm crisis. Banks were closing, CEOs were fired or getting fired or quitting, and there was a need for CEOs. So I was fortunate. I get an opportunity after only 5 years of training, but knew nothing, absolutely nothing, and did that for 3 years. And maybe the rest of the story when I met Chris's dad, and we can talk about that later.
Well, that is it. It is scary when you get put into it and you just start it, and it's like, holy crap, here you go, because you have a lot of plates to fill. Some that you've never run those roles before, and which brings you have to trust a lot of people around you. You have to be able to pick the right people. How did you pick the right people when you first started that, Steve?
Well, of course, there was a staff in place. And to be very honest with you, I was terrible at delegating. I wanted to do everything myself. And I really didn't trust other people. And it's something that I had to learn as a CEO, to let go and let these people do their jobs. And so that's something I was terrible at in those first 3 years.
So what type of methods can you share with our advisors? How did you build that to let go of yourself? Because a lot of CEOs have that trouble. Is like they're the best at doing everything. Do you have a little tidbit you could give our listeners on what you did that you think stands out in your mind?
Well, I think I really had to learn to be patient. I didn't know these people. I had to get to know them so that I could evaluate their skills. And frankly, some of them were not very good, and some of them were great. But I had to, during those first few years, learn that lesson.
Did your military background give you any strength as well?
It was probably the worst thing I could have done. And the reason is there's such a structured chain of command in the military. And I was only in the military for 2 years, but I was at the low end of that chain of command. So I didn't really learn to lead other people in the military. I had to learn that on my own.
Okay, that makes sense. Those structures are nice when you're going into it to have something move forward. But when you're starting as a CEO, that's very difficult because there's not usually structure. You have to make changes and walk through things.
Right.
Walk and learn, as they say, walk the walk and talk the talk. Right. So what was it like when, now our listeners don't understand and haven't had the privilege to have the information that I do. And I'd like you to share about your first day at Greenbelt Bank. First of all, what happened? Because this is a follow-up to a second podcast that we have for Greenbelt Bank and Trust. So would you mind sharing with our listeners what happened and how you got the role of CEO?
Yes. I was sitting in my office in Spencer, 3 years into my first job as CEO, still very unsure of myself. But as I mentioned, I was in a big company and they had a real need for CEOs. So I was going to be sent to a different bank in the company, the largest bank in the company, by the way. So they obviously had faith in my ability, but I certainly didn't have that faith in myself. And I got a call from Chris's dad, Rocky Weaver. He said, "You don't know who I am, but I'd like to introduce myself." And I just bought a bank out of receivership during the farm crisis, and I'd like to talk to you about running it. And I said, "Well, thank you." As you can imagine, I just said, "Thank you very much. I appreciate the call, but I've got another opportunity that I'm going to pursue, and thank you."
Yeah.
And Chris's dad was a very, very good salesman. He said, "Well, what are you doing Sunday?" I said, "Oh, nothing." He was hanging out with my family, and he said, "Well, why don't you drive down to Iowa Falls? I'd just like to meet you. Would you be willing to do that?" And I said, "Sure."
Okay.
And so I went down and I met Rocky, and that was the beginning of a long, long, long relationship with his family. And he was an excellent salesperson, and he sold me on going to work for a single bank rather than one of 36 in a big company. He sold me on that, and he ran a company in Iowa Falls, and excellent management skills, I'm sure. And I got to know some of the men that worked for him later, and I can see what a great leader he was. So I took the job.
So how was that going from 36 banks to one individual? What him being a great salesman is definitely one part of it. And you're a highly intelligent man that would go, hey, there's challenges working at those 36, but there's challenges with working just one. Talk about all your eggs in one basket, right? What was the feeling for that, Steve?
Well, it was frightening because when I was in the bank of 36, I had many, many peers and people I could reach out to. I call them on the phone, say, "I got a problem, and can you give me some ideas?" And I just was going from that network to zero. And Rocky, of course, was not a banker. He was a rock crusher.
Yeah.
So a great person, great leader, great businessman, but not a banker. So I was pretty much out there and just kind of had to sink or swim.
Well, for our listeners, I'd like everyone to understand there was a lot more, I'll say, rocks put on Steve's shoulders. There was an unfortunate accident that happened that very early on took Rocky's life away. And that meant Steve was running the bank, who brought him on has passed away, and he has a whole family. And his sons inherited the bank on top of it at the age of 13 years old, which has got to put a lot more pressure on you, Steve, where it is you're spinning your different hats. You got your board, you got your people, you got to grow your business, you got to maintain your business. Then there's this added pressure to put those kids' life on your shoulders too. So everyone, I'd like you to understand the challenges, and I'd like you to speak about that a little bit, Steve. How was that?
Well, a little background. Chris's dad was severely injured in an accident, and he was a quadriplegic. And he was in Craig Hospital in Denver, Colorado. And I went to visit him there, of course. And he asked me, asked me if I would take care of his business, and therefore I'm not physically take care of his children. They lived in another family, but that if I would take care of the business for his boys, and they were 13 and 3, by the way. The 3-year-old was, obviously nowhere near able to understand anything about what was going on. So, well, there in that hospital room in Denver, I promised him that I would. And a promise is a promise. And when you make a promise to someone on their deathbed, it sticks with you. And I never forgot that. And there were times, as you can imagine, when I thought, I don't know if I can do this.
I know it.
But, that it started with that promise.
And that just shows you who you are, because that is a big, heavy load to start with. And then as I talked with Chris in our previous episode, he tells me how incredible a job you've done and mentor, and how you ran the bank like you, the type of person that you are. Like he had mentioned, Greenbelt goes out to the actual clients, sees them in their farms, in their yards, their hog barns, all of that, versus come in and sit and do business on our hours. So help me understand and help our listeners understand your very first day. You're now the CEO of Greenbelt and Trust. Tell me, what was it like? What was going through your head? What was the first things you wanted to attack?
Well, it actually was the first 2 days. What I did was I met personally with every single employee in our company. I wanted them to know who I was, but I really wanted to know them and their family, their kids, their aspirations. And it took me 2 days, but because I wanted to spend enough time with each person. But that seems kind of silly and, obviously something that a CEO should do. But by that point in my career, I was starting to learn that I really need to rely on these people. I cannot do everything myself. So I thought, I really need to get to know each and every one of these people and make a determination how we're all going to do this together. So that was my first 2 days.
Wow. That would have been a lot of work, but exciting, because listening to your people, your culture. So let's talk about your culture a bit. There would have been changes in the culture that you made, and people are very important. People are usually the slowest thing in a business, yet they're the most important thing in the business, and a lot of businesses forget about that. So when you were talking to them and learning about them, what did you find that you had to change the most in the culture when you're walking and looking to them all that you thought would be the most benefit?
Well, I can tell you what I discovered in those first 2 days. There was a terrible divide between men and women. Back in those days, there were no women in executive positions in banks. I was walking by one of the older ladies in the bank one day, and I heard her on the phone. Someone was calling for one of the officers, and her answer was, well, the men are in a meeting. And I thought about what she said, and what she basically was saying was that the men are the officers of the bank, and we ladies really have nothing to do with it. The men are in a meeting. So, and I'm proud to say today, we probably have more women executives in our bank than we do men. We have women ag loan officers, really bright, great bankers. And of all the things I did in that bank, I think that may be one of the things I'm most proud of.
As you should be, first of all, for actually listening to a comment like that, to be able to pull that out and go, wait, I should examine this, stop and do that. So what type of things did you do to enable the women to move up as well?
This episode is powered by Honest AI. Honest's optimized onboarding process and minimized documentation result in an expedited and seamless financing journey for clients, enhancing their contentment and commitment. Through identity verification, financial data validation, and creditworthiness assessment, our software empowers companies to make well-informed financing choices.
Well, just opportunity in a growing company. We didn't grow rapidly, but our mission was to grow, as you have to in business. But there are going to be opportunities, and give women the opportunity just as equally as men. And we started doing that and found that they were mostly younger women. Frankly, the older women, they really weren't interested in that. But the younger women were. And we discovered that they will just blossom if you give them the opportunity. And so it became, I think, known that a woman could succeed and grow in our bank. And that didn't happen overnight, obviously, but over years that became, and I think our customers noticed that too. Half of your customers are women, right?
Yeah.
So it was apparent that we were truly an equal opportunity employer.
That is fantastic. And what a great message to bring. I get the feeling, Steve, you read it a lot like a family. The way it is you look at it. That's a very broad term, but it wasn't this is my job, your job. This is how do we work together? How do we succeed to our goals, which is what every CEO wants. But the reward that we saw that you gave people, your nurturing that you had to do with Chris's family, and even to look after that, to have all that weight on your shoulders, but to move it forward, what would be some key lessons and instrumental pieces in your leadership journey that you would recognize and want to share with everybody?
Well, you mentioned the being a family. That's, I think, gotten to be really cliche in business today. Everybody said we're a family, but Chris's dad, again, I'll go back to Rocky. That was his philosophy, that we are a family. If someone is injured or down or whatever, we all need to rally around that person. And that was his philosophy in business, not just personally. And Chris saw that, I'm sure. And when we talk about our company as a family, I think Chris is a big part of that culture. To be honest, I'm more of a numbers guy. I am. And so I really rely upon Chris to, keep that culture alive in our company.
It is important, like you said, to have that and to bring the people around you, and being a numbers guy, this is a question that just jumps out at me is, so here's a bank you just started, they're in receivership. Okay. Now you have to start off, and you've taken that bank to $680 million revenue. So kudos to you. You scaled it fast, quick. But what was the biggest change that you made from a bank that was in receivership? Now, I don't know. Did they handle farming and then small business? Was that their main, or did you make a change to that? What was the biggest change from where they went wrong to what you took right?
Well, they really, I'm not going to say they really did anything wrong. It's other than being an ag bank in the middle of Iowa in the farm crisis. I mean, they were not the only bank that failed during the farm crisis. And I think a lot of those banks, frankly, if they had had enough capital, I think they would have been able to withstand it and come back out of it in the 90s and be fine. But they didn't have the capital, and the regulators closed a lot of these banks. I need to correct you a little bit. You used the term rapid growth. We did not grow rapidly. It has taken us over 30 years to grow from 55 million to almost 700 million. And the reason is we just didn't have the capital. we had one owner, and he died, and his estate was probated. We had to pay all these federal estate tax and state inheritance taxes. So we had a lot of debt and not a lot of capital. So we call it a brick at a time. I mean, we just started to grow a brick at a time, and finally got all that debt paid off, started to make a little money, and I don't know, it's been decades, but we decided early on that we would retain 60% of our earnings so that we could grow. And when you do the math on that, it equates to about 6%, 5 or 6% growth per year. If you can make decent earnings, hold back 60% and grow another 5 or 6%. And that's what we did, and it took 30 years. So we did not grow rapidly.
Well, thank you for that correction. And that's great for our listeners to understand that one step at a time. And thank you for that, because it is important to see that. It's a grind that you every day doing that one brick at a time. It would be wonderful if we all had excess capital. But to pay off the debts and take it a step piece forward, what advice would you give a new CEO, a CEO that's experienced for a number of years, and a CEO that's been in your seat for as long as you have? What advice, could you wrap advice to all three of them in one? Is that possible? Or individual, whichever's easiest for you?
Well, I wouldn't presume that I could give a lot of CEOs a lot of advice, because I had to learn coming up all by myself. But when we have a leadership class in our bank, and I speak to them every year. And there are three things that I tell young people that want to grow in banking. Number one is you have to know accounting. Accounting is the language of business. If you can't speak the language, you're not going anywhere. And a lot of young bankers they just really didn't ever get exposed to accounting in college. And so you don't have to be a CPA, you don't have to be a tax expert, but you need to basically understand the balance sheet, the income statement, and the cash flow. I mean, that's just simple thing. Second thing I tell them is, well, actually, it's the third thing. Let me go back. The second thing I tell them is you should be reading. You should read every day, at least an hour. If you're watching a lot of TV, you're wasting your time. You will become a much better communicator, written or oral, if you read a lot. And it doesn't matter what you read. You can read science, you can read fiction, you can read, it doesn't matter. Just read. And don't quit wasting your time doing other things. The third thing I tell these students is there are going to be sacrifices. If you think you're going to get to be a CEO on Easy Street, you have got another thing coming. Every night when you go home, you're going to look at the ceiling and think, oh my God, what are we going to do? And nobody's going to help you. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. You can get some advice, but at the end of the day, you're the head coach. And head coaches don't get tired. You know, they're there every morning, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, even if they're not feeling it on the inside. So if you're not willing to make those sacrifices, a guy one time told me, the best job in a bank is the number 2 position. You're well compensated, you have lots of authority, it's interesting, but you don't make the ultimate decisions. But I wanted to be number 1. And a lot of, it's a good thing a lot of people do want to have that job because it's important.
Absolutely, it's important. I think it's incredibly important. And you talked about it. You said it very well. The coaches, they're there. They're jumping into it. They're bright and early, which brings you to, how do you do a work-life balance? Like, you've got your family. You've got your family of business. You've got your reading time, your presentable times, all the other stuff. How did you create a work-life balance for yourself and for your team?
I was terrible at that for a long, long time. When my children we were raising our children. I was not, I don't think, as good a father as I could have been. But it just took a long time to really, I think the main thing was just to get comfortable with who you are and have some faith in the people that you lead and let them do their jobs, even though, let's face it, the way they do a job probably isn't the way you would have done it. And you could say, I'd have done it differently. But you just have to just put that away and realize that the way they did it was fine. Maybe it was better than the way you would have done it. Let them have their day. And I did learn that. To be honest, when you hear pro athletes, particularly quarterbacks, talk about late in their careers how the game slows down. And I never really understood what that meant until really I was nearing retirement. Not totally retired even to this day, but nearing ending working every day. And I think as you grow and you get to a certain point, it does slow down a little bit. You don't see all these fireworks going off and all these fires you put out. You learn to be more focused on what's really important. And you kind of filter out some of the things that, let's face it, they're important, but they're not that important. So that was something that I really had to learn. I'm probably still learning it today. And if some CEO says, I got it all figured out, no, it's not true. You never, ever get it all figured out.
Yeah, I think the only age group that's ever figured it out is when we were all 14 or 18 and we had every answer. Or that's the way it was for me. My father had told me, the older you get, the less you know. And I'm like, Dad, that can't be. But it is so true.
Oh.
And the quietness, like you're talking, you're right. And I think our listeners just got an incredible amount of value out of that, Steve, because really they're told, focus on this, focus on this, focus on this, to find they have their ladder on the wrong building, to get to the top and go, crap, I should have been a building over, right? And that's where it's finding the right team, like you talked about, and having behind you, creating the culture that you've had. You get to go through a lot of challenges in the length of career you've had. An example, and it didn't work in those spots, in executive positions. Now it's common, it's fantastic. But then we have technology. Before, everything was done by hand, face to face. People still want to feel connected, but technology brings more into it and helps companies scale, makes it quicker, better. Have you had any challenges with technology when you've seen it through your career? What stands out in your mind as an example we can share with people?
Oh, right now, cybercrime is just rampant. We're struggling with it as a bank. We buy this software, we hire these consultants, we're constantly trying to protect ourselves. And, here 2 weeks ago, $11,000, so we learned that lesson, tweaked our systems so that it wouldn't happen again, but there's always something out there, some criminal that's smarter than we are. And the AI, I think, has so many opportunities for banking and how to learn more about our customers and to better serve our customers. They're just tremendous opportunities and tremendous threats. Our customers in our bank in Iowa, they call us up and say, hey, this is John Miller. I want you to do that. So, hi, John. How are you? Good to talk to you. How are the wife and kids? It's not John Miller. It's somebody else. And that is just terrifying. And but our bank, our director of IT is on it. I mean, we are. It's important. I mean, banking. You said it. Banking is matriculating from hands-on to digital to AI, and if you're not there, you better get there.
It is the world. It is the way the world is going and changing. Steve, I would love to talk longer with you. Unfortunately, we have about 30, 35 minutes for our listeners. And I might ask you to come back again. I've really enjoyed the input that you've given and how you've shown everybody that Greenbelt Bank and Trust has grown from under your leadership, and how you've passed that on, and the trials and tribulations you've shared with us has been fantastic. I think your knowledge has been so valuable that I can't even find the right word for it. So I want to thank you for your time here today with us, Steve, with all of our listeners. And if I get some questions, I'm going to come back to you and ask you again. So thank you very much for your time and input today. And we really enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Thank you. I enjoyed being with you.
Thank you, Steve, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We will see you next time on Mind Matters.